More journalists, more dirty coppers, more death. Welcome back to David Peace's Red Riding Quartet. It's been a while, but I will finish talking about this series because I love it. I reread most of the second novel in preparation for this episode. It was, in fact, the first one I read years and years ago as a brash teen, before I started the series again from the beginning early last year, that is, 2022. The second novel in the series, 1977, is, if anything, more disturbing than the first. It focuses on two characters you've already met in the previous novel, 1974. Bob Fraser, a police officer who tried to be helpful to the journalist Eddie Dunford, the main character of 1974, by giving him information and helping him out with his stories. And Jack Whitehead, another journalist, Dunford's frenemy, who is referred to religiously as Jack f***ing Whitehead, due to his success as a journalist, in comparison to Eddie Dunford. 1977 switches between these two characters chapter by chapter, and further continues the story of the Yorkshire Ripper murders and the deeper conspiracy that concerns David Peace's first series of novels. "1977 opens, at the risk of sounding cliché, explosively. Fraser is tearing to the scene of a crime with his partner, terrified of who he might find there. His girlfriend's a prostitute, a woman called Janice, and the Yorkshire Ripper, who the police are chasing, killed, almost exclusively prostitutes. In first-person present tense, Fraser races to Janice's flat after he's done dealing with his police busywork and tells her that she can't stay around here, that it isn't safe, that she needs to leave. She tells him she'll leave if he marries her, and then that he should fuck off, and that's that. Fraser and his buddies then arrest a black man named Barton, who lives in the same building as Janice, strip him naked, and make him masturbate into a cup in front of a room of officers. What? Why do they make him do that? Because they found out that the Ripper's blood type is B, and this is their way of humiliating a suspect and simultaneously finding out his blood type. B is quite a rare blood type, the rarest. Eventually they let Barton go, because his blood type doesn't match, and as an apology they take Barton to a strip club, ply him with drinks. And the police are portrayed, or should I say exposed, as dirty, unethical, and very, very racist. And their reputation only suffers more over the course of the next 300 pages. Smash cut. First person past tense. The pace slows down as we follow the journalist, Jack f***ing Whitehead, who's obviously extremely troubled, despite his reputation for being charming and successful. He's been having dreams of a dead woman, of somebody being prosecuted for the crime of her murder, and of a strange reverend who, throughout the novel, visits him. The novel continues in the same way as the last, but you get the feeling that Peace has refined his style. There's more repetition, more of the refrains, as Peace names them, the same thoughts and dreams recurring over and over again, often in italics to separate them from the main narrative, but also forming part of it. And always in the background, lurking around the corner, pulling up in a car with his face half covered by his hat, is the Reverend Martin Laws. 1977 does a really, really great job of keeping the reader totally in the dark, of trickling bits of information your way so you never really know what's going on, but you always know that something isn't right. Who is this dark, noir Reverend who has something very off about him? What's this recurring dream Whitehead's having, and who has died? What happened to Whitehead that he's now this nervous wreck, this drunkard and drug addict? Was it the loss of Eddie Dunford, the protagonist of the last novel, and his friend that did it to him? Or was there always more happening underneath the surface that we're only now seeing because we're in his head? Before any of these questions can be answered, we jump back to Fraser's perspective. I've intimated here, and I mentioned in the last episode, that Fraser's sections of the novel are fast-paced, shotgun fiction, a reviewer once called it, because his chapters are written in the present tense. You're there as Fraser finds things out, as he carries out his investigations. And this, of course, is also supposed to be a reflection of his police work. He doesn't already know what's going to happen, and he's not telling you after the fact. He's finding out at the exact same moment you are. He's just as lost and confused as you are. So don't worry if you do end up reading these, even though I'm going to spoil them all for you, if you're confused, because the characters are too. Whitehead sections, on the other hand, written in past tense, are slower. They're almost a form of torture. It's as if he's looking back at his descent into madness and hell, because it doesn't get much worse than what happens to Whitehead. By the way, spoilers. But if you're not paying attention, you'll miss information in this novel. Important tidbits are nestled in between drunken or insane rants, stream of consciousness ramblings and these forever repeating refrains, these choruses, these lines that keep coming back up over and over again. Conversations are often unlabelled, that is, you don't know who's saying what unless you go back to the start and count the odd and even lines. A few throwaway lines near the end of one of Fraser's chapters reveals that a woman named Claire Strachan, or Strachan, I don't know how to pronounce it, sorry, ran away because she thought she was going to get murdered by some members of the Special Police, which is the branch of the police force that deals with, or in, more truthfully, organised crime. If you blink, you might miss this nugget of information, or forget about it later and wonder who the hell Strachan is. Peace's tetralogy, I was obviously feeling clever when I looked up that word, is so dense with characters and information in a very noir kind of way that you really need to have your eye on the ball to figure out what the hell's going on. In another section, Bob Fraser's called away from the Ripper case to investigate a series of post office robberies, and you wonder what they have to do with anything. But that's also the point. The reader, like the characters, isn't meant to know what's going on. The novels are hallucinatory, less dreamlike and more nightmarish, and nothing seems to really make sense. There are lies and conspiracies, and more lies and cover-ups, and even more lies. And even by the end of the 4 books, you won't have a complete picture of what's happened. In fact, people are still trying to piece, pardon the pun, together the plot of Red Riding. I'll leave a link in the description that does a great job of detailing the full timeline of Red Riding, not only from 1974 to 83, which is when the actual books take place mostly, but also the years preceding the novels, which are really important to their plot. Part of the reason why the plot is so disturbing, why the novels themselves are so bleak, is because so much of what happens in them is based on truth. Who knows how racist or violent the police were in the early 80s and late 70s, though you can make an educated guess, can't you? But in one instance, the police find out that the killer's blood type is B, as I said, which is really quite rare, and the police chase this lead for ages in real life as well. And it keeps coming up across the novels. The way in which the victims die as well in the novels is accurate, and even some of the dialogue actually happened too. And knowing that what you're reading, while sensationalized and fictionalized, is actually true makes it more difficult to get through. Even the weather, Peace looked up the weather reports for the specific days he was writing about. In 1974, the first novel, one of the things reviewers picked up on was how dark and cold and wet it always was. But it wasn't just pathetic fallacy. Whenever it was raining in the novel, whenever it was cold, Peace had looked up an archived newspaper weather report and made sure the weather he wrote was correct. 1977 takes place in the summer, and accordingly it's really hot a lot of the time. Police officers are sweating and stinking in their cars, and you can almost taste their disgusting, overworked, underwashed stenches as they sit around in the so-called murder room and try and catch this killer. When we return in Chapter 4 to Whitehead's story, we open with a hallucination sequence. Whitehead's dreaming about a house, and when he wakes he's surrounded by angels, quite obviously going mad, unable to get these thoughts out of his head. Now, I'm no psychiatrist, but that doesn't sound good. Even George Oldman, Assistant Chief Constable George Oldman, asks him how he's doing and seems genuinely concerned. And Strachan, the woman who was murdered earlier, comes up again, and she's in a list of murdered women who Oldman thinks were probably killed by the same man, and it's here that the conspiracy starts very slowly to unravel. You begin to learn that other people are killing these women, and making it look like the Yorkshire Ripper killed them so they can get away with it. You only have an inkling at this point, and this isn't a classic murder mystery where you might be able to figure it out for yourself, but you know that Strachan didn't get killed by the Ripper, otherwise Peace wouldn't be spending so much time on her. Then again, that's the type of red herring he might throw your way just to keep you guessing. At this point, Fraser is himself looking for the murderers of Claire Strachan, who, it's revealed, died in 1975, and is working with a policeman, including a man named Craven, and also occasionally kicking about is a PC named Douglas. If you've read 1974, you'll recognise those names as the people who got shot by journalist Eddie Dunford with a shotgun at the end of the novel and wonder how they're still alive. It turns out Craven survived with some permanent damage to his leg, and the police covered up the shooting, instead blaming it on the IRA, this being the 70s and all, because Dunford was getting too close to the truth. But putting together all of these disparate puzzle pieces, making everything fit, would require a wad of A3 paper, a mind map, a family tree, a makeshift timeline that began in the mid-60s, and a mind much cleverer than mine. One thing that does keep coming up there that you could possibly get a handle on is a magazine of gentleman's specialist literature called Spunk. This magazine plays a big role in the plot. because some dirty coppers called the Yorkshire Six have been trying to control all the pornography in the area for a profit, and they've been acting as pimps of the local prostitutes at the same time. You don't know this yet. This is something that becomes clear later and in the following novels. Right now you're just following Fraser going mad while he tries to protect Janice, his girlfriend, and Whitehead going mad because, well, he's a bit mad. As the story develops, Janice gets raped by a group of officers from the Special Police and from Vice. One of them almost certainly the policeman called Craven, who's involved with the Yorkshire Six. Whitehead speaks to one of the victims, who describes her attacker for him, and soon after, another woman is attacked, and Whitehead's convinced it isn't the Ripper because the modus operandi is different. You start to believe him as you read, and you find out that another policeman, who we later find out to also be involved with Craven and the Yorkshire Six, is pimping Janice and a number of other prostitutes in the Yorkshire area. About halfway through, Whitehead meets the Reverend Laws, and they go for food. Whitehead tells him that he wants the pain to stop, that he's having visions, and Laws tells him they could go upstairs and all the pain would go away. But Whitehead's not having it. It looks like Laws has something to do with the tragedy Whitehead suffered. You're not spoon-fed anything. The characters talk as though they already know what's going on, because they do. There's no exposition, and you don't know whether what the Reverend's offering him is sexual or darker than that. All you can vaguely piece together at this point is that it's possibly Whitehead's wife or ex-wife who's died, and that the Reverend had something to do with it. And then another body. Fraser's falling over himself in madness, terrified he's going to find Janice covered up under the sheet the police are using to hide the body. But it's not her. Janice instead has disappeared, completely skipped town, left a goodbye note, and nothing else. And other policemen, they all tell Fraser to go back to his wife and his kid, to forget about her, to go back to his family. Meanwhile, Whitehead's still receiving visits from the mysterious Reverend Laws, who tells him he wants to help, that he's running out of time. Simultaneously, the Yorkshire Ripper begins sending letters to Whitehead, which turn out to be a hoax, the famous Wareside Jack case, who in real life got 8 years in prison for perverting the course of justice. And then Jack receives a mysterious phone call from someone asking to meet, saying he has information that indicts the police, the Reverend, basically everyone. His name's BJ, which is as silly as it sounds, and is meant to be a nudge nudge wink wink. BJ becomes an integral part of the story for the next 2.5 novels. He was there when Dunford shot up the police officers at the pub in the first novel, and he's there for the rest of the 3. Always around with this information that he's terrified is going to get him killed. He asks to meet with Whitehead on the Saturday evening, and one of my favourite parts of the novel, during Saturday daytime, Fraser and Whitehead first properly meet at the police station, while Whitehead is looking for some files. And in this conversation, it's one of my favourite lines of the series. It's a microcosm of Peace's style throughout. Claire Strachan sometimes went by the name Claire Morrison, and Whitehead assumes that Bob Fraser knows this, and so he says, "You don't know any C. Morrison then?" "Not off the top of my head, no. Should I?" "Just that Claire Strachan sometimes went by the name Morrison." He stood there, staring down at me, cold blue eyes drowning in hurt pride. "I'm sorry," I said, watching the walls come up, keys turn in the locks. "I didn't mean to forget it," he muttered, like he never would. I just absolutely love that line. I think, in a few words, tells you exactly how proud and hurt Bob Fraser is, because Whitehead's embarrassed him only a little bit. Just about the second name of somebody who they don't even know is important yet, after the probably hundreds of names that Fraser's been chasing after. There's no reason to be embarrassed. Anyway, I just really, really like it. That evening, BJ shows Whitehead the pornography magazines, which reveal Claire Strachan was, for a time, one of the models, and it gives him the address of the place where they distributed the magazines. And if you're confused at the moment, you should be. Like I said, as the reader, you have absolutely no idea what's going on. All you know is that there are some dirty coppers kicking about, but you're not quite sure why yet. And now you know it has something to do with a pornography mag called Spunk, and a skinhead with a ridiculous name called BJ. In the next few pages, what's going on becomes clearer, though the overarching plot is still a complete muddle and doesn't, like I said earlier, doesn't even really become clear at the end of 1983. In a nutshell, Fraser realises that there's been some corruption within the police. There's been some files signed out before the death of Claire Strachan, and he believes it was therefore probably a police officer who either killed her or had her killed. And he takes this to a high-level police officer called Maurice Jobson, who acts like he'll sort it out. The very next chapter, Janice, Fraser's prostitute girlfriend, is dead, and Fraser's being interrogated for the crime as though he's the Yorkshire Ripper. He isn't, of course. He's being set up, and the astute reader, which I am not, and didn't work out until the final novel, the astute reader will realise that it's Maurice Jobson who set him up after Fraser went to him for help, so the corruption goes all the way to the top. Maurice Jobson's one of the highest coppers there are, and is, incidentally, one of the protagonists of the final novel. At the same time, Whitehead's learning about the pornographic magazines and the prostitution ring which the police have been running, meaning the corruption that Fraser's just found out about is due to them trying to cover up their activities running prostitutes and monopolising pornography in the Yorkshire area. And Whitehead finds out that some of the women who have supposedly been attacked and killed by the Yorkshire Ripper actually were likely killed in the same manner as the Ripper by police officers trying to cover their tracks. His current girlfriend, one of the victims, also a prostitute, was also on the payroll of these police officers, and finally, in a hotel room on a rainy night, Whitehead and Fraser meet, and the link to the novel before becomes clear. In 1974, the cases concern the disappearances and killings of young girls, and Claire Strachan was a witness to one of these killings. Shortly thereafter was murdered, meaning the police and Maurice Jobson also have a link to the very killings they were supposed to be investigating. And on top of that, the actual very first killing, which is linked to the killings in 1974, happens all the way back in 1965. Even so, even though you have this semi-clear idea of what's going on now, the plot's not clear. By the end of the novel, Fraser's killed himself after finding out not only that Janice is dead, but the son he thought he'd had with his wife isn't even his, it's the child of another police officer called John Rudkin. So he gasses himself in his car, and we never truly find out everything he knows. Meanwhile, Jack's nightmares and hallucinations have gotten worse since the conspiracy has begun to unravel, and he goes to his girlfriend's house and finds she's committed suicide. His anguish too much, he meets the Reverend Laws in a hotel room. Laws tells him this is the only way to end the pain, the way all things must end, tells him the Bible says it's so. Then Law proceeds to hammer a screwdriver into the top of his head. Jack's pain goes away. And so ends David Peace's second novel in the Red Riding Quartet. Without any real idea of what's going on, the reader's left only with pieces of the puzzle, parts of the story that never really come together to form the whole. And as I said at the beginning, this is still true even at the end of the fourth novel to an extent. But the plot, while important, isn't the be-all and end-all of Red Riding. Really, Red Riding's about madness, sadness, bleakness, depression, corruption, and death. Almost everyone in the series meets their demise in some horrific way. Almost all of them are mentally unstable, affected by horrific things that have happened in their past. The visions Whitehead has been having are revealed to have been of his ex-wife, who died under quite mysterious circumstances, definitely linked to the ominous and, we now learn, barbaric Reverend Laws. Fraser's whole life falls apart because he finds out his child isn't his, and the woman he truly loves has been killed. In the first novel, Eddie Dunford is tormented by a case he's been working on named The Ratcatcher, and later by the horrific things he sees having been done to children, and goes on a rampage. One of the minor characters in 1977, a policeman named Hall, is framed for the killing of a member of a gang called the Spencer Boys, and he's killed by them quite horrifically, as is his young child, and then his wife's raped. Not to mention the multiple victims, both fictional and real, of the Yorkshire Ripper, who are depicted throughout this series. Peace has said, something I mentioned in the last episode, that writing crime for entertainment is unethical. Crime stories should be presented as crime is in the real world, horrific, complicated, and ultimately unavoidable. While I disagree with his, in my opinion, quite self-righteous view of why his novels aren't entertainment, because they undoubtedly are, I can understand why he writes the way he does. The entwined concepts of mental instability and of the alleged protagonists of the story, the fact that they're all morally bankrupt in one way or another, and that of the horrific crimes which are happening all around the moors, regardless of who's committing them, makes for very, very disturbing reading. The books are addictive, but simultaneously you don't want to read them. The descriptions of the crimes are really graphic and brutal. Peace doesn't hold anything back. And in fact, he said that this was something he wished he hadn't done. In later interviews, he said, particularly with regards to the first novel, where the crimes are against children, he said that murder is horrific enough that it doesn't need to be described in such detail to be so horrible, particularly when the victims are children. At the same time, the fact that Peace describes almost matter-of-factly how each of these victims died is representative of how a journalist or especially a police officer would experience them, and it only adds to the darkness of the books, knowing that this is how these people in real life would actually have to see and deal with these crimes and read about them and look at pictures of them over and over again. And as I mentioned earlier, you know that a lot of these crimes actually happened, that they're being described in the way they were actually committed. Nestling this fake crime story, like that of the corrupt police prostitution and pornography ring, within the story of this real-life crime spree is, frankly, noir genius. The plot's so convoluted that it certainly harks back to those pulpy, plot-thick crime novels of the past, and the fact that all of the main characters are troubled, morally ambiguous, or downright immoral as narrators, that lends itself to this style of fiction. It interests me what the police officers who actually worked on the Ripper case think of how they've been represented here. It strikes me as likely representative of how the police operated in the mid-60s, if the Lynette White and Stefan Kiszko scandals are anything to go by. And I'm planning on talking about these in more detail in the future, but go and look them up anyways. They're really eye-opening about how, again, morally bankrupt the police were right up until the present day. Stefan Kiszko is a really, really tragic and horrible story. Brace yourself before you read that one. And Lynette White as well, actually, is pretty horrible, but not quite as horrible as Stefan Kiszko. Red Riding is a series at its core about the bleakness of crime, the horrific effects it has on people's lives, on the lives of everyone who comes into contact with something as dark as a murder. The murder of a child, of a woman, a sister, a brother, a father, a son. And in that respect, Peace absolutely nails it. His series is as potent as a screwdriver to the skull, and it only gets worse from here. Thanks for listening to this episode. In future episodes, I'm going to go into the plot in more detail and try and flesh out exactly how each of these novels links to one another and explain the story in its entirety, or at least as much of it as I can work out from doing some Googling. There's a Reddit post that I mentioned earlier, which I will link in the description, which, if you want to read them, I would recommend reading them first, trying to work out for yourself, and then reading that description. But it's a pretty spot-on description of the events of all of the novels. And yeah, God knows how he managed to keep track of it himself, because it's so complicated. Anyway, I recently started a Patreon to see if I could maybe make a small amount of money for the time I put into all of these episodes, and for my short stories, which never get published, and the blog posts I occasionally write, and the music I make, and blah, 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 blah. And you can subscribe really cheaply. It's just £2, or I think €2.50 a month. And in return, you'll get to see what I'm working on, offer me feedback, just criticise me, call me names. You'll get some exclusive content that I don't publish anywhere else. And I also make a lot of different genres of music. I focus on dance music, drum bass, but currently, for example, I'm working on a little kind of grunge, punk, metal type EP thing. You'll get access to a load of unreleased tracks that will probably never see the light of day, and you'll also be able to see bits of the YouTube videos I'm planning on eventually getting finished before anyone else gets to see them. The link to the Patreon's also in the description. It depends where you're listening to this, whether you'll be able to see it, but you can also just go to patreon.com/JMALSTON. Thanks. And before I go, this is the end of all of that. But I would like to explain a little to the, 100 or so people who actually listen to my podcast, where I've been and where my plans are for this podcast for the future. If you're not interested in that, then you can stop now. I've stopped talking about the book now. The book's gone. Wait for 1980. The script's ready, so hopefully I'll be able to get that out in February. But I do want to take the time just to explain this, because I think it was July when I published 1974. So, it's now January. And the first reason I've been away is that I'm lazy, which actually isn't true at all. I'm not lazy, but there's just been a lot going on. For the last couple of months, I've had some personal stuff going on, which has hindered my ability to record episodes. And I'm doing a monthly radio show as well. You know, it's only 4 months old now, and it's only monthly, but it's a lot of preparation, and I want it to go well, so I've been putting a lot of effort into that. That's every 4th Tuesday on Kane FM 103.7 Kane from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. UK time. So you can listen to that online. Just Google Kane FM. But aside from the show, I've also been trying to write more. I had a really productive couple of weeks at the end of November or beginning of December where I wrote 3 short stories, 2 of which I think are actually maybe possibly not completely awful, and that was really nice. And I've got a load of ideas together for the blog. I considered transcribing or rewriting some of my podcast episodes, but I don't really have time for that, so it's just an idea at the moment, and I'm not sure these work that well as articles, really. For anyone who knows me in real life, I've been doing a lot of music production recently and had some minor, very minor successes. So that's been eating up a lot of my time. In 2022, I had 3 EPs, and at the beginning of the year, my debut single come out. As I write this, I'm meant to be working on a remix for an anniversary record for one of the labels I release with. So Dennis, if you're listening, I'm sorry, I promise I'll get that done for you. But if anyone likes drum and bass music, you can check out my drum and bass Instagram by searching DerwitchDNB, DerwitchDNB. My big problem really is that I just like so many different things. I want to be a podcaster and a filmmaker and a musician and a writer and a photographer and a blogger and a journalist, and there just aren't enough hours in the day to do everything, and I also don't get paid for any of it really, which is fine, but it just means I have to have a real job as well, which means I don't have as much time to do all of the lovely things that I'd like to do. The second reason, which is a bit bad, is that I haven't been reading that much recently. I know that's heresy for a book podcast. When I get a bit overwhelmed with everything, I sort of put the books down. It's a bit silly really, because reading is relaxing. It would probably help me a lot, but it's that sort of petrification you get when you have so much to do, so you just do nothing. I've been reading bits and pieces. I read an interesting but not very well written book called The Jakarta Method by Vincent Bevins. It's about covert American intervention in a ton of non-aligned but slightly left-wing states during the Cold War, and the massacres which the Americans either enabled or at least didn't stop in many of those states. But I just didn't really have enough to say about it, and simultaneously didn't like or hate it enough to make a full-length episode about it. I've also been reading David Peace's second series of novels, which are set in Tokyo. There's 3 of them, and they take Peace's experimental style and go a bit ham with it. And I quite like them. The third one so far is my favourite, which I'm just finishing off reading right now. The second one I didn't really enjoy that much. First one was okay. And again, when I'm sort of on the fence about a book, I don't see the point in doing a review about it. It's fun to talk about stuff I really like, and I really enjoyed doing the Old Man and the Sea Hemingway episode because I disliked the book so much. But when I'm just sort of about it, I don't really see the point. However, I did buy myself a load of classic noir books, The Postman Always Rings Twice and The Maltese Falcon. I've also got a couple of Truman Capote's on my bookshelf, which I would like to read, and I almost definitely will talk about all of them. And the third reason that I've been away for such a long time is because I'm working on a much bigger episode about the TV show Scrubs, which I also want to make into a YouTube video. I've got the first draft done of the script, I think, and it's already nearly 20,000 words long, so it could be sort of 2 hours worth of material, not including all of the clips of the show I would really like to include to actually highlight the points I'm making. So that's a whole thing, and I'm a complete amateur when it comes to making video episodes or video essays or whatever it would be. That's it. These are the reasons why I've not been here. For anyone who actually cares, I'm sure most people turned off at wherever it was. I don't know how long I've been rambling for now, but that's it. Thanks for tuning into this year's Thinly Veiled Cry for Help. Please support me on Patreon, it's only a couple of quid, and I will be back much, much sooner than last time.